adapt, and build resilience to the ongoing and continuing impacts of climate change. We'd love for you to say hi in the chat and let us know whereabouts in Brisbane you're from. And if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, please chuck those in the chat as well. So to start our discussions, I'm going to hand over to Nat Isaacs, the driving force of 1 Million Women, to set the scene for tonight.
Thank you so much, Grace. And it's really lovely to have you all on the call tonight, because I know that it's a tough time. It's 7 o'clock on Easter Thursday, so we really appreciate your time and the time of the candidates tonight. So before we get started, I'd just love you to do one thing. Would you all put on your videos? And if you could, we will put on your videos just for a minute so we can all say hello to each other, and we can take a screenshot of everybody with their videos on. That would be really wonderful, and we can all say hello. So pop your videos on. Come on, let me take a screenshot so we can do a really beautiful Instagram Brisbane session. Yes, thank you. And hi, everybody, and just say where you are from in the chat. Beautiful. So I'm going to pop myself on, I'm just going to pop myself on Spotlight. And so, yes, I'm Natalie Isaacs. I am the founder of 1 Million Women. And this session tonight is it's part of a big campaign that we are doing called She Votes, and it is about our message for this election, which is we are voting for clean, affordable energy now. And it's a really big piece of work that we've been doing over the last year. Electrification for us, household electrification for us, feels like it is a win-win. It is a win for the climate, but it is also a win for our cost of living pressures that we are all feeling. Earlier this year, well, actually back in February, 1 Million Women took a delegation of 23 women to Canberra, and we talked to 26 politicians over 3 days about household electrification, about the lived experiences of us all. We were women from across the country, across age brackets, and across very, very different lifestyle experiences. And I think that sharing our real and honest stories about household electrification was really important for our politicians to hear. And we have a policy ask that we took to Canberra, and it is about getting 1 million households, support from the government, support from all politicians for 1 million households to electrify over the next 3 years, over the next term of government. It is doable. It is 10% of all households, and it must be done, because if we are to stay on track with our targets, if we are to electrify every home in the country by 2040, we need to get 1 million households electrified or on the journey to electrification over these next 3 years. That's what we talked to Canberra. We think that this can be something that every politician can support. It supports healthy, comfortable homes, and it's a huge solution to climate change. That's what tonight's session is all about. And thank you so very much. We actually have, a big number of you on the call tonight, and we really appreciate that. So I am going to hand you back to Grace, who will be running the session with the candidates, and I'll come back a little later and to ask all your questions. So please pop your questions in the chat, and we will get to them. If they are questions that are outside of household electrification, then we may be able to get to them by the end of the night. If not, we will send those questions through to the candidates. So thank you so much, and over to you, Grace.
Thanks, Nat. I wanted to start off just by quickly introducing myself. So I'm super excited about this chat. I was lucky enough to be a part of the delegation that 1 Million Women took to Canberra in February this year, as Nat discussed, and I also spend time in our community advocating for climate change. I've been very passionate and vocal in this space for many years now and love connecting with like-minded people in the field. I currently study politics, philosophy, and economics at UQ, and I hope one day I can turn my advocacy into a career. So the delegation to Canberra, was a really great reminder for me that we must talk to our representatives about the big issues, and we actually all can do it. It's so much more accessible than I thought, and then that you might think. And it's literally their job to talk to us. But I do find that young people, particularly women, often feel locked out of the political space. So it is my absolute goal to make every woman's voice heard and feel politically empowered. Now, a big welcome to our candidates. Thank you so much for giving up your time and coming along tonight. We did invite all nominated candidates campaigning in Brisbane to join tonight's panel discussion, and our guests are the candidates who responded to our invite. So I will introduce them in alphabetical order, starting with Madonna Jarrett, representing the Australian Labor Party. Then we have Stephen Bate from the Greens. And finally, Trevor Evans from the Liberal National Party. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. So my first question of the night to start us off is an opportunity for the candidates to introduce themselves. But just quickly, I'd like to say it's not intended to be a debate, so candidates are asked not to rebut verbally. This will help us stay on track as we have a lot of questions to get through. And if we could keep our answers just to 1 minute each, that would be awesome. At the end, Michelle will give an overview of how preferential voting works, which is super useful information for the upcoming election, especially when we're voting for climate. So to get us started, I'd love to hear from you all a short introduction about yourself and tell us what made you decide to run in this election, and maybe share something that surprised you about being a candidate running, starting with Madonna.
Thanks, Grace, and hello, everybody. It is wonderful to be here. It is a Thursday night before Easter, but that is absolutely fine. So as Grace mentioned, I'm running for, I am Labor's candidate in the seat of Brisbane at the upcoming federal election. A bit about me, I grew up in Paddington in a small workers' cottage. I'm one of 8 siblings, and we had a lot of foster kids live with us. And growing up in that big family taught me the importance of community and looking out for each other, and that fundamentally drives sort of it's my mojo. It's how I think. But from a career perspective, I started my career in health as a radiographer, but for the last 25 years, I've worked in the private sector in developing policy on areas such as improving women's economic empowerment, workforce participation, progress of youth, amongst others. And a lot of the work that I've done in the women's economic empowerment policy area really focused around small to medium enterprises, micro businesses, where the focus was actually on climate initiatives. And this could be very simple things like, how do you support women doing water efficient farming, for instance? What are the various elements associated with that? Or starting a business around plastic collection or recycling, even school-based education. And I guess one other thing I would say is that one of the most recent projects I kicked off before embarking on this little political journey was to have a good look at the policies around the world and look at the data behind them. And that is those policies that are being introduced to help countries around the world continue their journeys to net zero. So I started put my hand up to run because I really want to bring my, I'll say, values of looking out for everybody and looking out for others with my experience in the policy development area to make a real difference to the lives of the people of Brisbane. What surprised me? I'm not going to say surprised me, but was so encouraging is I've knocked on, over 10,000 doors, and seeing young people so engaged in this election and willing to have conversations and wanting to talk to us about not just the topics of the day here, but others. And that's just so important to our democracy and to our future. And the other thing would be, I was not surprised how I'll say our voters are really concerned about Trump-style politics coming into Australia, and it's really being rejected by our community. And again, that gives me a lot of hope for our democracy. So with that, I'll leave it there, Grace.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that, Madonna. Stephen.
Thanks. And hello, everyone at home or wherever you're coming from. Just wanted to also extend my acknowledgement of the traditional owners of the land I'm on today as well. And thank you for that acknowledgement as well, Grace. Well, I am, for those who don't know, I am the current MP for the seat of Brisbane, Stephen Bates for the Greens. And I was inspired to run in politics quite sort of later in life, I suppose. I was never really into politics growing up, don't really come from a political family or anything like that. But I was fortunate enough, after moving to Australia in 2009 with my family, and I lived in central Queensland, came down to Brisbane to study actually a very similar degree to what you're doing, Grace. When I did it, it was social sciences. I think now it's the PPE degree. But during my time at uni, I got offered a job over in the States, and I moved over and lived and worked in Florida for a little while. And while I was there, that's really what got me interested in politics, to be honest, was going through America's minimum wage, going through their healthcare system, going through their society more broadly, and seeing the pitfalls of putting profit over absolutely everything, profit over people, profit over the environment, profit over the planet. And for me, it was this moment of walking into the stockroom where I was working, and one of my coworkers was crying because she was having to choose between insulin or paying the rent. And for me, that was just this moment, this light bulb moment of, oh my goodness, I have to understand how these systems work. I have to understand how I can help form policy, how I can actually help change these structures so that people aren't put into the position like this person was. So I came back to Australia, finished my degree, and really found myself aligning most closely with the Greens through everything. So I very much am of, as you would probably expect from what I've said, making sure we're looking after the environment, making sure people have access to universal healthcare, and also looking around the world and seeing what works successfully. And maybe we might not be able to copy and paste things exactly into Australia, but we can at least look at blueprints, at what's going right. We can learn from it and try and shape it into the Australian context. So that's sort of what motivates me a lot. I look at a lot of the Scandinavian countries as just sort of a great blueprint for what can go well and what maybe we should be aiming towards, and sort of, figuring out how we can put that into the Australian context. For me, what surprises me about being in politics and being a candidate, I feel with the way the world's going at the moment, not much surprises me anymore, but I do get pleasantly reminded all the time. I think that people are inherently good. And I think we see that a lot, like when we had the cyclone come through Brisbane and when we've had floods come through Brisbane, the way that people will pull together and support one another and support people that they don't know, but they want to support their community. It never surprises me, but it always helps, I guess, like fill my soul and restore all the faith in humanity that I could possibly have. So yeah, it's been an absolute privilege being RMP for the last 3 years, and I would love to keep doing it because there's so many things that we still need to do. The climate crisis isn't going away. We need to make sure we're stopping new coal and gas projects as well as investing in electrification. And there are so many things on the agenda that we still need to tackle if we have any chance of hitting our climate targets by the end of the decade. So thank you for having me.
Thanks for that, Stephen. Trevor.
Thank you, Grace. Good evening, everybody, and a big hello again to Natalie, who I've met and worked with in a few different ways over recent times as well. For those of you who don't know me, I was the member for Brisbane for a couple of terms from 2016 to 2022, and I've decided to put my hand up again to run. My original motivation for running for politics was that, about a decade ago, I was the CEO of the National Retail Association. So in that role, I was a real advocate for retailers and small business owners, shopkeepers, restaurateurs, and that's been my family's background. No history of sort of politics or government in my family. And I found in that role that I was, often meeting with politicians, ministers, government policymakers, and I was walking away from a lot of those meetings getting a bit more frustrated that not enough of them I felt understood how small and family businesses really worked, how they were making laws and implementing policies that didn't really account for how, all of those folks out there in small business land, really operate. And small business is half of the economy and half of the society out there and half of the workforce. And I guess I got to a point where I thought, somebody like me can whine about it, but if somebody like me doesn't put their hand up and give it a go, then who will? And that was my initial motivation for running. And I'm really pleased that I did. I've always styled myself as somebody who can get real outcomes out of political processes. So I didn't waste any time when I was the member for Brisbane. In my first term, I was a co-author and an architect of marriage equality. And in my second term, I threw myself into environmental policy, and I helped to co-author and land Australia's first national recycling laws, which have led to a lot of the retail schemes and product stewardship schemes and so on that we're seeing sort of stand up and start to succeed at the moment. There's lots more I could say about, local delivery, but I guess when I think about the motivation to put my hand up again, as an economist, I've been watching with horror as the cost of living crisis plays out, and I know from my past track record that I've got a real contribution to make on the economic front when it comes to economic management and reining in inflation and some of the challenges there. When I think about the environmental policy side of things, emissions were coming down when I was there, and they've flatlined since I haven't been, and I know I've got an outsized contribution to make there as well. So I put my hand up again because I believe in delivering real outcomes, and quite frankly, because I love the job. Surprises, well, look, this is not my first campaign. It's not even my second. So there's not a lot that surprises me in this game. But I will say I am constantly surprised out there in the community by all the wonderful stuff that's happening and all of the great ideas, all of the aspiration, all of the dreams that exist. And I think the very best role of a member of parliament is to be an enabler of all of those different dreams, all of those different directions, all of those different aspirations. And, that's how I applied myself when I was previously in the role. And I look forward to the opportunity to potentially do it again.
Amazing. Thank you, Trevor. So we'll jump on to the second question. Just another reminder for everyone to put their questions that they have in the chat. So my second question is about cost of living and electrification. So we all know that cost of living is a major issue for Australians at the moment, and we know that it is directly linked to the increasing impacts of climate change. We know that Australian households could save $2,000 per year on energy bills by transitioning to an all-electric home with solar and batteries and more. Our 1 Million Women community have told us that they're keen to electrify, but there are barriers like upfront costs, especially for renters, apartment living, and particularly for social housing. So as part of the Canberra delegation, we did have many discussions regarding the costs of living, and the comparison between those of us who are on the path to being able to electrify versus those who are managing enormous electricity bills was really stark. So my question to you all is, if elected, what initiatives do you or will you be championing in Parliament for household electrification, and how can Brisbane do better in this space? I'll start with Madonna.
Okay, look. Labor has a very strong, proud record, particularly over the last 3 years, of moving our country down a path of renewables. It's been one of the hallmark policy areas that they've been delivering on very, very quickly. So at the moment, we are already up to 46% of our grid being renewables, which is roughly halfway to the 82% target. We've got installed enough renewables to power over half of the Australian homes, and we've approved more renewables than any government in Australia's history. And that's a real credit to Labor in just 3 years. But there is a lot more to do, and renewable energy and subsidising the take-up of renewable energy has also been a key initiative of the government. In actual fact, solar uptake in Queensland, we're a world leader on that. And that was in part due to the incentivisation and support of individuals being able to buy their solar panels. going forward, should Labor be re-elected this election, we will be incentivising the uptake of batteries, because at the moment only 1 in 40, I think, households have batteries at the moment, and the cost is a challenge, and Labor recognises that, which is why they're introducing the 30% discount. And the goal is to have 1 million of those batteries rolled out by 2030, which is batteries in a lot of households. Now, you know, that takes a lot of pressure off our base loads. It provides a more consistent source of renewable energy for households, and it does help keep prices down, that's for sure. So that's one of the big initiatives, and it's costs about 2 point something billion tied up in that. So it's not a small amount of money, and that battery program will be rolled out from 1 July. And it's not just households, it's community organisations, businesses, etc. And then when it comes to affordable housing and rentals, Labor has invested, or will be investing, a lot of money, like hundreds of millions of dollars, in the Social Housing Energy Performance Initiative, which will upgrade 100,000 social housing units across Australia to be more energy efficient. So, you know, part of that is moving to full electrification, but also it's, you know, LED lights and ceiling fans and having the appropriate hot water systems, etc. So there's a lot happening in this space. I could go on, but the big hallmark initiatives are the funding for the rollout of batteries. The other thing I would mention too is we had one of the kickoff initiatives back in 2022 was to have community batteries available to communities, and that actually would help where there are large multi-scale residentials, or where there are a lot of renters. But we unfortunately have not been able to get the battery approved for Newmarket through the LNP Council, who are holding it up on the grounds of green space. Now, this battery is like less than the size of a car. So there's a few little challenges like that, I think, that we still need to work through. But clearly Labor has got the plan, it's implementing it, and they're moving forward as quickly as they can.
Thanks for that, Madonna. Stephen.
Thanks. I think it's quite a multi-pronged approach I think we have to take to this. I think definitely we've announced a few policies actually in recent weeks. We released our entire sort of transition plan in the Greens to explain to people and sort of talk people through how we're going to get to our net zero targets and how we'll be able to get up to 100% renewables and get off fossil fuels as well. So it's sort of a multi-pronged approach. But when we're talking about electrification, I think it comes down to a lack of choice for people. I think a lot of people want to make climate conscious decisions and they want to do right by the planet. But what happens is the financial hurdles is essentially what it is. You've also got like people like myself, I rent and I live in an apartment building. There's very sort of few avenues that you have to be able to make more climate conscious decisions about where your power comes from, how you can store your own energy and things like that. You're sort of at the behest of the building. And if they don't have access to millions and millions of dollars to be able to sort of invest in this infrastructure, you're kind of stuck. So I think it's a few different ways we can go forward here. So it's about making sure that social housing and public housing has the ability to be able to electrify. And so the Greens were very proud at the end of last year, in negotiations with the government, we were able to secure about a $500 million investment in electrifying social and affordable homes. Good start, but there's a long way to go to be able to electrify the entire stock. So 100% committing to continuing on the path to being able to make sure that all our public housing stock and social housing stock can be electrified, so that people, like you said, it's about reducing bills. People in that position may not have the financial ability to be able to do it, but that is where it's the responsibility of the government, I think, to step in and make sure people have access to clean energy and the choice to be able to access clean energy and electrification. We've also got a policy that we announced recently about grants and small interest loans for batteries as well, both for individuals in their own homes and for small businesses as well. So that policy is basically $5,000 in grants, up to 50% of the cost of the battery, and then up to $10,000 in low interest loans, up to 50% of the cost of the battery. That is for individuals. And then if we go into small business, you're looking at $25,000 in grants, up to 50% again, and then $100,000 up to 50% of the cost in low interest loans as well. So making sure that it's not just individuals who are able to electrify their households, but it's also small business that can get on board with this as well, because it's about saving everyone money and about saving the planet at the same time. So we have to make sure we're addressing both things there. And then the final thing I kind of already touched on a little bit with living in an apartment, about making sure that apartment buildings have access to investment funds so that they can receive grants from the government to be able to update their infrastructure. So we announced a $2 billion investment, basically, that would allow apartment buildings to get access to some funding to be able to, whether it's create a battery for their communal spaces or put solar on the roofs of these spaces of the public, so that they could roofs on the buildings, so that they could basically use renewable energy to power at least the communal areas in these buildings, so that people could save some money. So I know it's a bit of a long-winded answer there, but I think it's multi-pronged and there's loads of different approaches that we should be taking for it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephen. Trevor.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. I agree with that last bit from Stephen. It's a big question. There's a lot that could be said. So how about I start by saying that electrification is an incredibly exciting area of policy development, and it's something that I've certainly been heavily involved in, not just inside the Parliament, but outside in the years since. For those of you who don't know, in the last few years, I've been working on a few boards and advisory boards and in some consulting roles. And one of the advisory boards that I've worked on is in an area that looks at leadership in environmental policy, and has involved, well, it's actually where I met Natalie. From 1 million women to start off with. And it's involved some really great conversations, some connections, and some engagement with some amazing groups and technical experts. And we're talking people like the master electrician, so we can talk about workforce. It's involved people like Rewiring Australia. Policy development is something that I'm incredibly passionate about. And one of the, I think, lessons that I've learned over my time in politics is that lots of promises and lots of commitments get made on the evenings of elections, but it's the periods in between and how you approach real reform and delivering real outcomes that actually matters. And so a member of Parliament, is able to make a contribution on the national level, of course. I mean, one of the things that I'm proudest about is that Australia has this bipartisan now net zero by 2050 target. That happened because people like me were in the Parliament and arguing inside the right channels and inside of political parties and inside of parliaments to make it happen. But then you think about all of the policies and the rollout that's required to sort of underpin that. And a lot of focus often goes to the energy sector, but there's some other sectors as well that really matter. We can talk about transport, we can talk about agriculture. The one that I'm passionate about and the one where I made a huge difference was in the space of recycling and waste management, where many people don't know, but one of the largest areas of emissions in Australia is actually the methane that comes out of landfills. And so I'm very pleased to say that a lot of the work that I did with that sector has meant that Australia is actually now a world leader when it comes to reducing emissions from waste and recycling. Those technologies, the businesses and the sector and the experts involved are now actually exporting Australian know-how right around the world to help other countries to solve some of these challenges. But back to home electrification, because I know that's the main theme of tonight's conversation. Grace, you mentioned in the question some of the opportunities that exist around there, some of the barriers. All I can do is agree and point to the fact that lots of the heavy policy work has already been implemented in the term, in this term of Parliament, including the nation's first ever Senate inquiry into home electrification, which was led by the coalition. In fact, it was chaired by my very good friend, Senator Andrew Bragg, who I have many conversations with around these topics. It reflected many of the opportunities and the barriers that Madonna and Stephen have both touched on. So I won't, I guess, repeat all of those. But Stephen made the good point, and Senator Bragg's inquiry made the same finding, which is, solar panels is one of the areas where Australia already leads the world. That's fantastic. But when you think about the additional capital that's required, the additional investments, you think about the barriers in particular for renters and tenants, that's the space where government policy can make a really big difference. And I guess I'll just end on this note to show you what we're capable of. The new LNP state government has already implemented a supercharged solar for renters plan, which will contribute $3,500 and give more options to people like Stephen who are in that rental situation and want to be able to take advantage of government funding to help get across that capital barrier. These are the sorts of policy outcomes that I'm really passionate about, been working on even outside of Parliament. And I guess I look forward to the opportunity to be a part of the heavy policy development work that's needed in the next term of Parliament to continue to deliver real outcomes.
Can I jump in? I just wanted this was a question that I was going to ask. Thank you all so very much for your answers there. Just picking up on that point about renters. We took this, last year we did a survey to our community. It was on electrification. 4,500 women took the survey. Over 90% of our respondents said that they had taken some measures towards household electrification, which is just awesome. 67% said that they they couldn't go any further because of the upfront costs and because of the barriers, and they needed government support. In that mix of people, there was a huge number of renters, and when we took our delegation to Canberra, and Grace was definitely one of these women who had these stories about renting, and I think that it's a big issue for renters. What will you champion? And you touched on it, Trevor, but I'd love to hear from you all. What will you champion when it comes to renters? How do we really support renters that want to be part of the electrification story, but don't want to have, these costs like flow through to them and rent goes up? So just love to hear that. And then I'll throw to some questions from the rest of the crew on tonight. So maybe over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to just jump in. Really, really, really good question. And I think that, that's the thing. It's like when you're asking about electrification and people want to electrify, you don't want to, I think anyway, make the renter pay for everything because they're paying to improve an asset that they're then not able to recoup the investment on because they're not the one that's going to be able to sell that home and make the capital gain on it. So what our policy is that we're taking at this election is actually establishing a $10 billion government investment corporation, which would basically allow, I'll explain how it works. It's a bit policy wonky, so you'll have to forgive me, but I like this stuff. So essentially how it works is renters would basically tell the landlord that they would say solar on their roof, for example, in this situation. The landlord is only able to refuse if there's structural issues with the property or sort of safety issues or whatever it may be. The important thing to then note is that the landlord is not the person that then pays for this to go on the house. So in this investment, basically you would apply to the government, they would install solar on the roof. The landlord then has an option with what they want to do then. They can either then pay back the value of the asset over time, and it would be indexed to CPI or WPI, whichever is lower each year, kind of similar to HEX, or they don't have to do that if they don't want to. And the only time where the investment by the government is recuperated is when the title of ownership is transferred. So basically when they sell the house. So that, I think, strikes a bit of a good balance, and that it's not making your renters pay. It's also not making the landlords pay, as you said, Natalie. So you're sort of hopefully disincentivizing people from passing on that rent increase to people. And it sort of helps everyone, helps renters especially lower their power bills. Like you said, I could say people, I think it's like $1,400 a year or something like that in Brisbane would be the average saving. So it's a huge amount of money that people would be able to save, and it would ease pressure on the grid. It would help decentralize our power network, and it would save people money and save the planet in the long run. So I know it's a little bit of a wonky answer, sorry, but I think it's a really cool policy because it allows for sort of a good outcome for as many people as possible.
Can I just add to something? They're looking at it from a slightly different perspective, because enabling, having the solar available to renters, and having community batteries and other batteries that are available to those that can be incentivized for developers to put into those buildings. That's one piece of it, and it's a very important piece of it. The other thing I would just add to what Stephen has said is around how do we also make sure that renters know and do have access to renewable energy. And part of that's working with the suppliers and making sure that suppliers are being very transparent in their sources of energy and giving consumers a choice as to what energy they are getting into their property. And there's a lot tied up in this. There's a lot of state issues involved in this, because it goes down to tidal laws and supply and all of that. But at the end of the day, I mean, there is another side to it, not just putting in solar panels and batteries, but also making sure renters have access to renewable energy and they know what they're getting.
Just briefly, I'll add one thing as well, if I can, Natalie. Of course, I'm aware of 1 million women's, policy prescriptions, and I've looked at them, and there's a lot of overlap actually with lots of the other great groups doing amazing policy work in this space as well. Obviously, I'm not in the Parliament, but I look forward to the opportunity to be in there to work through some of these sorts of policy ideas with you. We're going to be entering a period of time, of course, when government finances have a lot of pressures on them. And one of the things that speaks to me about the policy ideas that you've put on the table is, Stephen used the word sort of, HEX style loan. These things can be off balance sheet. That has risks, when you do those sorts of things in terms of the government bean counters and how, departments of finance think about them. But fundamentally, what we're talking about is adding value, adding capital to one of the safest classes of investments that exist around Australia, and that is residential housing. The prospects of government, over time recouping the investments that it made when properties are sort of sold on or, transferred is very, very high. And so I think there's a lot of merit in that prescription. Now, I'm not announcing that as LNP policy. As a major party candidate, you'll appreciate that I'm not in a position to do that in a forum like here tonight. But I'm very, very thoughtful about it, and I guess I'd make the pledge here today to all of the folks here that this is an area of policy that I look forward to digging into and hopefully landing some great things if I've got the opportunity to serve in the next Parliament.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of those answers. Nat, did you want to jump in and ask some questions from the chat?
Yes, I'd love to. And just to finish that off, I think that when we all went to Canberra, every single conversation we had with politicians had the renting issue in there, and there was this. Well, we really do have to work with the state governments when it comes to renting, but I do think that the federal government and the federal politicians must lead the way. And so thank you, all three of you. I have got quite a few questions in the chat. So this one from Paola. Hi, I'd love to know how the candidates think we can get multi-partisan support for action to reduce the impact of climate change and on the adaptation and resilience measures. Without multi-partisan support, we continue to tread water on an issue that is impacting us all in many ways. And I guess that question is the ultimate question, to be honest, because we really believe household electrification is one area where every politician can agree on. But climate change needs multi-partisan support. How do we get there? Who wants to start with that question? Trevor.
Yeah, happy to give it a go. There is no doubt that climate and energy policy have, been at the forefront of election campaigns for a long period of time. And that means that it's an area of policy that attracts more than its fair share of partisanship. And it also means that it's difficult when you are an MP in the middle of a parliament actually trying to get things done to move aside some of the partisanship and some of the simplification of issues that occurs in election campaigns when you're actually trying to land serious policy detail. But it can be done, I promise. And, I guess 2 examples of that I would give. As I said, I was very proudly part of a government that put Australia on the course to net zero by 2050. And that is now very much a bipartisan, multi-partisan sort of agreed target for Australia. There's no deviating from that in terms of the positions of the major parties and most of the minor ones as well. But I want to talk about a much more specific Brisbane example of how you can achieve cross-party support. So I was the member for Brisbane in February 2022 when that terrible flood event hit us. And so I, was of course one of the ones first in line to be knocking on all the doors, talking to locals, seeing the damage. In the weeks and the months since that, myself as well as some other MPs and not just LNP MPs fought for and managed to secure a significant fund. I'm just trying to think. I think it was called the Resilient Homes Fund. It was, and it was close to $800 million of federal money that went into that, and it was co-administered by a Labor state government and a LNP Brisbane City Council. Now, what does that actually mean? Where did that money go? Well, I can tell you right now, because I've knocked on a lot of doors again in the last few weeks and months myself. And when I go to the places that were heavily impacted by the floods back in 2022, I'm seeing 2 things. I'm seeing either the places that were just unviable in low-lying flood-prone areas have been resumed by the council and the state, or much more often, places have not been resumed. Homeowners have been able to access those funds and they've been able to make amazing adaptations to their homes. Now, for some of the old Queenslanders, that's about putting them up much higher on stilts. For some of the double level ones, it's been about retrofitting some of the downstairs areas. But door after door that I've knocked on in some of the low-lying areas, like the bottom of Windsor and the bottom of Ashgrove and Albion and places like that, I've met homeowners who've just been so pleased, and they've pointed to me. Some of this work's happening right now in some of these homes still. They've been able to say, well, look, when a bit of water came through the other day, I was able to hose it out and clean it up. There was no long-term damage, and I love my new home and I love still living here. And it is possible, I promise, despite some of the histrionics that occur in the middle of election periods. That sort of heavy lifting, that sort of multi-party approach really is possible.
Yeah.
And was there another question from the chat? No.
Can I just jump in on that one, on the bipartisan piece? Look, the one point I think I would say is that climate and energy policy really does need to be above politics at the end of the day, because this is the future of our planet, our communities, our families. And I think it is difficult sometimes to get bipartisan agreement when you have very opposing views on, we have people in certain parts of politics like Labor that really believe that climate change is real and action needs to happen. And that's why we've moved forward very quickly in the first term and have a full plan to move forward should we get a second term. But there are certain quarters within our government where climate change is denied. And when you're facing those very opposing views, it is difficult to get bipartisanship approval and, bipartisan agreement on issues. Having said that, the Labor government has moved forward very, very quickly and has managed to get support through the Senate, which, as you know, is not, Labor does not hold the majority of seats in the Senate. And we have been able to do that in a lot of areas. And I think that is positive. But I just want to point out that there are some challenges to that sometimes. That's the reality of being in a world where people have different views, for good or for bad.
Am I good to quickly throw in my 2 cents? To be quite honest, I think this is an example of money's influence in politics and big businesses' influence in politics. I think that the fossil fuel industry has known that climate change is real for a long, long time now, and they have been very open about funding organizations and funding third-party organizations to stop any action from happening. And I think that one of the biggest hurdles to achieving multi-partisan and cross-parliamentary support for, as Madonna actually even noted, even believing that it is a real thing, let alone moving into achieving multi-partisan support for electrification, is the influence of that money in politics. And so I think the sooner we get corporate donations out of the picture and limit the amount of money that people can really donate to politicians, I think as long as money has that influence over our decision making, I think that is what I think truly limits us achieving multi-partisan support, is those vested interests.
Okay, another question from, well, there's a question for you, Trevor. Fantastic to hear your passion for electrification within the Liberal Party. Would you be prepared to cross the floor? And if your party didn't support electrification policies?
How should I say this? I'm very proudly in one of the parties that allows its MPs to cross the floor, and most don't. And it's, I've had my fair share of newspaper headlines over the years with my name against notions of crossing the floor. I've never had to. And the reason that I haven't is because I know how to be effective to bring about change and to find compromise and deliver outcomes inside of a major party and inside of a parliamentary system. So, the very first time that these sorts of issues came up in terms of crossing the floor were over marriage equality, right? And there are all sorts of headlines and all sorts of suggestions that I would need to do that in order to get that reform done, because it had eluded so many governments of so many persuasions in the past years. I didn't cross the floor. I never had to. I didn't even threaten to. In fact, I spent a lot of time in TV interviews deliberately telling people that is not on the table. That's not my only option. And, I feel the same way, I guess, around lots of other topical issues, including the issue of home electrification. I don't envisage that there will be a need for me to cross the floor to bring about great reforms for home electrification in the next term of Parliament. And the reason I don't is because the Parliament's first ever Senate inquiry on the topic was led by the Coalition. And I've got some other great colleagues and warriors for the cause, like Senator Andrew Bragg, who was the chair of that inquiry, who I know how to work with, to get things done.
Thank you for that question. That was just to you. So I've got one here. What is the view of the trade tariffs and the risk of an economic slowdown to ensure employment stability in Australia, especially for low to middle income employees that may be more vulnerable? Madonna, would you like to go first on that one?
Actually, Natalie, I was going to ask you to repeat that because a car drove past like beeping its horn. I couldn't hear what you said.
I will. What is the view of the trade tariffs and the risk of an economic slowdown to ensure employment stability in Australia, especially for low to middle income employees that may be more vulnerable?
Yeah, I mean, we do live in turbulent times. There is no question about that. And what's happening on the other side of our wonderful Pacific Ocean is causing a lot of instability, and let's wait and see how bad that will impact. I mean, it's already impacted the markets, etc. We've seen warnings coming out of various reserve banks from all around the world in relation to that. And I think we've just got to look carefully and have, I think, a stable government at this point in time when things are so difficult. And Labor has a really good track record when it comes to the economy. I mean, when we first came to power, inflation had a 6 in front of it, and it was going up. It now has a 2 in front of it. It's going down. We've created 1.2 million jobs, I think it is. Wages are growing, etc. So the economy is turning the corner, but we are in a very risky situation economically, in my opinion, around the world at the moment. And I think this is a period where we do need level heads. We need people not to jump quickly. We need to be listening to, I'm going to call them stakeholders, but what I mean by that is our communities around the world, and there'll be a lot of changes, I feel. But I do think that, you know, the government has put in place some really strong steps to help grow industries, and in Australia, that's growing industries around renewables. We are the government that has put renewables front and centre of our economic policy, our industrial policy. It's where jobs are growing. It's where skills are being developed. It's where you've got fee-free TAFE places, because they're the skills we're going to need in the future, etc. So everything is tied to to renewables, which I think is very positive for the planet. But, you know, we do have to be a bit cautious given the state of the world at the moment. And, you know, those tariffs are going to hurt America, you know, they're going to hit America very hard.
I'm happy to go next unless you want to, Trevor. Yeah, I actually agree with a lot of what Madonna said. I think the tariffs that America have imposed are going to hurt them a lot more than they're going to hurt anyone else around the world. I think it's very much a self-inflicted wound by a leader of that country who I genuinely think has no idea what he's doing, or if he does know what he's doing, he's solely in it for himself. I think that what Australia needs to be realistic about is that we're not going to be able to rely on the United States as much as we maybe have previously. I think both in terms of maybe militarily, you know, with sort of the US threatening their allies and our allies like Greenland and Panama and other places around the world, or economically as well. I think we have a bit of a responsibility now to sort of open ourselves up and look at new trading pathways going forward, especially like to bring it back to electrification and renewables, especially because we are in such a unique position here in Australia where we have so much sun, we have so much wind. We are in a position where we can actually start exporting the resources that we have into new and emerging markets. And I think whether that looks like engaging more deeply in our Pacific region, so with sort of our more immediate neighbors, or whether that looks like engaging maybe more with the European Union or countries like India, South Africa, Brazil, all these sort of more emerging economies and emerging markets who do have a desire for the things that we sell and that we make in this country. I think it's important that we don't, as Madonna said, maybe don't jump the gun, but I think we have to start being realistic with what the future of the world is going to look like for at least the next 4 years. And what that future is, we know at least will be unstable. So I think it's up to us as, you know, leaders in this country, and also, but just for our communities in general, is that we're real with people and say, I don't think we're going to be able to rely on this ally as much as we have previously. So what does the future look like for us? And what I think that looks like is investing in new and emerging markets around the world, is making sure that we still have as free-flowing trade as possible. And if that means we have to sort of remove ourselves more from the United States and focus on other trade blocks or whatever it may be, I think that is the best path forward for us.
I'm not sure that there's too much more for me to add. I guess, you know, as an economist and as a liberal who sort of broadly follows the classical liberal doctrines, you can imagine how I feel about tariffs and the reemergence of, you know, some of the terrible economic policies that existed in the pre-war years last century. And it's just added to the long list of hard-fought, hard-learned lessons that I thought humankind had learned in the 20th century that we weren't going to you know, repeat again. You know, I think about some of the issues with bloody social cohesion and anti-Semitism. I think about the economic and the trade stuff, and I just think we learned all of this. And any student of history, you know, knows what the lessons are, and we shouldn't be repeating them. So, you know, I guess there are the question asked about sort of some of the threats and the economic impacts. The direct stuff, I think, is relatively contained for Australia. Our beef exporters are far and away the most exposed, you know, in terms of the size of the stream of exports, the dollars that it's worth. But equally, our beef exporters are actually really, really good right now. They're match fit when it comes to finding new markets and diversifying. Why? Because China did this to them not too many years ago. So they've already learned how to find new customers and diversify. Our next two most exposed or largest export streams are actually exempt, one of which is pharmaceuticals, I think, from memory. I think the real potential challenge is not the direct impacts of the tariffs and how that places Australia compared to other trading partners around the world. I think it's the indirect stuff, which I think was referenced in the question. I can't remember, but the point is not the direct impacts, but the potential that this slows down growth amongst some of our other major trading partners, such as in Asia.
Thanks for that, Trevor. I might ask one more question, if that's okay with everyone. So the electrification of homes will save money for communities and also require the upgrading and renovation of thousands of homes, generating local jobs. This will generate local jobs for the installation of the solar panels, batteries, electric vehicle chargers, heating systems, etc. But the Electrical Trades Union is forecasting a shortage of 32,000 electricians by 2030. So how would you look to support the local workforce development in electrification skills? Would anyone like to start?
You go.
Thanks, Grace. It's a great question. And there are actually huge workforce issues across pretty much every sector of the Australian economy right now. It doesn't matter whether you're talking to retailers or hospitality, whether you're talking to our medical researchers, whether you're talking to some of our high-tech industries, skills and workforce are some big challenges. This is one of the topics that I've actually spent a fair bit of time talking to the master electricians about, specifically the workforce piece associated with how you develop policies for electrification. And I guess, what we will really be relying on is the turbocharging of many of those existing sort of master electricians businesses and so on. And we'll need to be using the sorts of policies, some of which we've announced over the last few weeks and months, to support the success of higher numbers of apprenticeships. And it's a really important point to make here. It's not around commencements, it's around completions. It's no good to just hit record numbers of commencements of apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are hard, they go for multiple years. And sadly, at the moment, the statistics show that, fewer than half of the ones that are commenced are finalised. And so we've got to do a lot of work in that system and working with the industry. And when it comes to creating policies to make that work, I always say the very best thing that you can do is go and talk to the experts. You go talk to the people that are in the hot seat and empower them. And that's why I've gone to the master electricians in the space, because they are literally the ones employing the apprentices and they know why they are and aren't working out.
I'm happy to go next if that's okay. Look, Labor, as I've mentioned before, I mean, Labor's big policy is to move our country to an economy based around renewables. And that is a recognition of the fact that we do need skills, not just electricians, but others as well, where to implement what needs to be done so we can become electrification of households and all the other bits and pieces that are going to go with us moving down that path. And that's why Labor's introduced initiatives like the fee-free TAFE, and those fee-free TAFE places, 100,000 of them are in these high demand areas. That's a pretty important piece of it. The federal government's also worked with the state and the territories around workforce plans so they can really understand where those shortages are and how the states, with the support of the federal government, can move towards filling those gaps. It is challenging, there is no question about it. The completion rates is a piece of the puzzle and is a challenge as well. And that's why the federal government is incentivizing certain industries and certain apprentices to continue and get to the end of their apprenticeship, because that's a really important piece of it. And the government, I believe, has also offered, I think it's around 5,000 for employers to take on apprentices. And again, that's another incentive to try and get more people into these critical skill shortage areas and upskill them as quickly as we can. It's not something that the government's hiding under the rug, at least not the Labor government. We've worked really hard we're working really hard to try and close those gaps.
Am I good to go? Yeah, I think it's twofold. Yes. I think number one is skilled migration. I think we still need people coming into this country to be able to fill the gaps in the workforce. And I also think it's education. When we're talking about education, I think You know, we know so many jobs of the future are going to need tertiary qualifications, whether that's TAFE or whether that's university. And I think it's important that we start moving towards having universal TAFE and universal free higher education. That's going to allow the labour market to be a lot more flexible. It's going to allow people to change what they're studying. It's going to allow people to be able to move between jobs to basically meet where the demand is. So I think it's that two-pronged approach. It's about acknowledging that we're still going to need people from overseas, basically, to come in and also help fill these labor shortages, but we're also going to need to make sure that we invest in the domestic workforce as well. And we do that through that investment in education and making sure that make sure that we're removing those financial barriers that people may have. Like we talk about it in electrification, we talk about it in so many other aspects of the economy. It's about removing those financial hurdles so that people have the economic freedom and choice to follow the paths that they want to follow without fear of maybe going into extreme amounts of debt in the process.
Thank you for that, everyone. Super quick one, could just be yes or no, from Michelle. She asks, given the climate crisis is escalating faster than scientists predicted, and that we have as much gas as we need, do you support the approval of new coal and gas projects? Maybe, Stephen, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. In surprise to no one, the answer to this question is no, I do not support the approval of new coal and gas projects. The science quite literally could not be clearer on this, that if we have any hope of hitting our 1.5 degree target, we cannot be approving any new fossil fuel projects. I would go further than this and say we also need to end the subsidies to the fossil fuel industry that we currently give out to the tune of about $14.5 billion every single year. And we need to ramp up our investments in renewables as well. I think it's got to be this multifaceted approach. And I also think, just to throw this in as well, I think as we are moving away from fossil fuels, I think it's so important that we actually make that industry pay its fair share on the way out as well. We have examples around the world, like particularly in Norway, where they have taxed their oil and gas industry at a very, very high rate, higher than anything the Greens are even proposing. And they've been able to use the income from that money to invest in 99 or 98% renewable energy in their country now. They've been able to build a universal healthcare system, build a universal education system, invest in public transport, have led to some of the highest quality of life on the planet, the highest levels of happiness, the best education outcomes, because they understood that the resources in their country belong to everyone and that everyone should recoup from the benefits of that industry. You know, our take from the oil and gas tax in this country a couple of years ago was something like $1.8 billion. We got more money from HEX indexation than we did from taxing oil and gas. Go over to Norway in the same year and it was $127 billion. Like, this is a complete disparity and completely unfair. So I think, yes, we should be taxing them on the way out, and we should not be approving any new coal and gas projects.
Shall I go next? Okay, so under Labor, there have been some strong new climate laws that allow the Minister for Climate and Energy to stop stop coal and gas projects. And the government has used these laws. One that you may all be aware of is the Clive Palmer mine, which would have bled coal into the Great Barrier Reef. But there's a flip side to this as well. We need to have approvals for renewable projects. And Labor, I think, has approved over 80 renewable projects, which is enough power to power 10 million homes. Now, that's a good thing, and that's where we should be going as a country, and that's what we need to be doing. But the reality is we have to transition to a country based around renewables, and that transition is going to have to rely on gas for the short term. But Labor has that plan. Like, I'll say it again, I've said it like 5 times on the call tonight. Labor has that plan to transition our country to a country built around renewables. And it's not just solar and wind, it's green hydrogen, it's education, it's all the things we've talked about before. It's changing our culture, it's changing our attitudes, it's jobs, it's skills, it's looking after our planet. And that's where we have to go. Labor's got the plan. And that's actually why I'm excited to be a part of a government, because I do think this is an area where we can be moving forward even more quickly than we are now.
Yeah, similar to Madonna's answer. So, you know, our plan sees gas playing a role in the transition. And, you know, honestly, the reason that both Labor and the LNP have it playing that role is that there's sort of no credible alternative plan that can be put up that doesn't have it playing that role in the transition without having a whole lot of other terrible and unintended consequences. You know, the main point of tonight's forum is to talk about home electrification. The very worst thing that policymakers could do for home electrification is make the cost of electricity continue to skyrocket and grow at the unsustainable rate it is at the moment. That will be the biggest barrier to home electrification for all of the households and all of the businesses that we want to go down that path. And that's why it's important to sensibly manage that transition. And it's why both, you know, I guess it is a point of agreement between the Labor and the LNP sides of politics, even though our plans are quite different in some respects, we both do see gas playing that transitional role.
Thank you, everyone. If I think we have time, I have one question that I would love to ask all of you super quickly. I want to know if you have any ideas about better empowering women within the Brisbane electorate to make more climate conscious choices, but in particular to home electrification. Would anyone like to start? Maybe Madonna?
If I can get myself off mute, sorry about that, everybody. Yeah, sure. Look, there's to me, this doesn't all have to be rocket science, right? And we don't need to be doing a whole lot of big, I mean, there's some big initiatives that have to get underway and continue that the government needs to be a part of. But you know, fundamentally, I think this starts with education again, and starting at the early education level and continuing on that journey, continuing that education journey as a child matures and the discussion matures. You know, there are just so many little things we as individuals can do. We can be leaders, and really just be out there living the way we should be living. The way, Natalie, you put in your book. I mean, it's just starts with turning off lights or reducing your food waste and things like that. But I also think, so that's the education piece. The other piece of it is, I think we can do more to support women entrepreneurs whose businesses align with climate conscious choices, and that they have access to the information they need to be successful. And that's, you know, the information that will enable their business to be successful as in any other business. But we do know that women face barriers to running a business and having their businesses be successful. Some of them are unconscious bias. Some of them are just old cultural ways of loans, etc., being made available, etc. But I do think that encouraging entrepreneurial women and women who are in the not-for-profit and giving them the information they need to be successful is another one. Recognize leaders through awards and, you know, just basic, basic recognition of doing really well. And these little things, you know, have community organizations and discussions and forums like the one we're having tonight. All these sorts of things help raise the awareness. They help stimulate thinking. But I do think on the side of that, we do need to have governments who are committed to climate action and who have a plan and who know what they're doing and are willing to put their money behind that to help our communities.
I'm happy to go next, if that's okay. I think gender equality, I think, has to go hand in hand with climate change and climate adaptation. I think, you know, everyone on the call probably already knows women will and do bear the brunt of climate change more than any other demographic, particularly in the global south. So I think it's about making sure that the best way we can, I think, empower women in the community to make more climate conscious decisions is to provide them with the choice to be able to do that. And I think, like I've said a million times tonight, that's about removing those financial hurdles to make better choices. It's not that people don't want to make good choices or don't want to make climate conscious choices. They're just financially and economically put into a situation where they can't always make the choice that they want to make. And so whether it's investing in grants for batteries or grants for solar, or assisting renters get solar on the roof, or getting batteries in communal spaces in apartment buildings, or making sure we're heading to 100% renewables, or whatever it may be. all of those policies combined help to reduce power bills, help to give people the freedom of choice to be able to make a more positive impact on the planet. And I think that that is the best thing we can be doing for people, is making sure that we're building a society, building an economy, building a system that makes sure that people have the financial freedom, the financial ability, and the economic choice to be able to make these more climate conscious decisions and make more positive decisions. Because like I said, I think people inherently want to do that, and it's up to the government to make sure that people have the financial capacity and the ability to be able to do that. So I think some of the best ways we can give people, like I said, the best ways we can give people those choices, particularly women, those choices into it, is to invest in home electrification, to invest in renewables, but also to invest in other elements of the economy like healthcare, getting dental into Medicare, making childcare universal, so that women in particular have the disposable income. Because we know women get paid less than men, they have less in their super than men, they often, like, more women retire into poverty than men. We need to make sure that we're setting people up for success financially, personally, and individually.
I think just in addition to some of the great points that have been made, I'm thinking about some of the experiences I had when I did run the National Retail Association. I worked with a lot of small business owners, a lot of women in business who had, amazing, everything from entire like chains of stores all the way through to sort of, online side hustles in terms of, their entrepreneurship. And when we did energy efficiency type work with them, and we did a lot of that actually, in terms of case studies and giving advice and so on, the first instinct of lots of people was to think about solar and batteries in their stores or in their businesses. And for some of the reasons that have been canvassed today, in terms of the upfront cost, or alternatively, lots of retailers and small business owners are actually tenants as well, right? They don't own their property, they're renters. What was really interesting was how a bit of extra awareness and some extra government support around things like programs and labeling and information could make a huge difference. I'll tell you what the two biggest things were for small businesses that we were doing energy efficiency work with were. One of them was looking at their appliances, so just using smart meters to figure out where all their electricity usage was going, and realizing that those old fridges or freezers at the back of their business were actually absorbing huge amounts of energy, and replacing them with newer energy efficient models immediately saved them, heaps of money, more than offset the cost of the new appliances. The other one was lighting, actually. So new energy efficient lighting that used far less electricity, and actually showcase lots of their products in their stores and their businesses way better than the last technologies. And so that, as I say, relies on a bit of awareness and information. And so that's about governments empowering groups and trusted voices out there that work with some of these women in these businesses to be able to know what questions to ask. And the other one is around some of those labeling and some of the other requirements that government can lean into to help people make the good choices when they do go to replace their appliance or replace their lighting or many of those other options that they have in front of them.
Thank you, everyone, for that. We'll wrap up the Q&A here, and I'll quickly pass to Michelle to give us an overview on preferential voting.
I'll just quickly say one thing, Grace, that there were quite a few questions we didn't get to tonight. And I'm just so sorry because we've run out of time. Sophie in particular had a question. I'm so sorry, so we've run out of time, but I will send all these questions through to each of the candidates and get a response for you all. So yes, thank you so very much. And back to you, Grace.
Thanks, Nat. Yeah, I'll just pass to Michelle and she can take us through preferential voting super quickly.
Hi, so I just wanted to quickly explain preferential voting. For a lot of people, it's been a long time since they learnt this in high school. So I just wanted to do a quick recap and a refresh. We've got a lot of good quality candidates for people to choose from tonight. So who do you vote for if you want to vote for more than one candidate? You can use your preferences. In Australia, we have a preferential voting system, I think, which is one of the biggest strengths of our democracy. It's something that helps us avoid the situation like in the US, where you have two two parties to vote for, and no third person if you're not liking what either party wants to do. But in Australia, we have that option to vote for third parties, knowing that your vote won't be wasted. If you do that, you cannot waste your vote in Australia. So how do preferences work? So in Australia, we have first round of voting, and that's where everybody's number one vote is counted, and that's all tallied up. Now, the person in that first round who has the least votes is eliminated, and then the preferences on the eliminated candidates get redistributed to the candidates left in the count. So if the person you vote for as number one is eliminated, then your vote goes on to your number two preference. You don't lose it. It's not wasted. It just flows on. So it's really important to understand that. And this keeps happening. If the person you voted for number two is eliminated, your vote then flows through to number three, and so on, until one of the candidates gets above 50%, and then they win. So when you turn up to vote, you will be handed how to vote cards from all different candidates, and people get a little bit confused sometimes about preference deals and think, well, what's the point of using my preferences if the candidates do deals anyway? But nobody has control over your preferences except for you. The how to vote cards you get are suggestions only. You can use your own preferences and choose who you want. So it's really important to understand that, I think. So can you use your preferences to vote strategically for climate? I'm a climate voter, so I use my preferences all the time to vote strategically for climate. So I look at all policies on climate, and the person with the strongest climate preference I put as number one. The person with the worst climate policies I put last, and then I just fill in either from the bottom to the top or the top to the bottom. So it's really, really quite simple to do that. You may think if the person with the strongest climate candidate in your electorate has no chance of winning, should you still vote for them? There's some good reasons to do that. The first is that if you put the strongest climate candidate at number one, even if they have no chance of getting in, then you're sending a message to the major players in that electorate that climate is really important to the electorate. And the other thing that happens is for each number one vote, the candidates get a certain amount of money for that. And that's it may help them to run a stronger campaign next time. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say, that it's still really important. We hope that tonight helped everybody to understand climate policies, electrification policies that each of the major candidates have put forward, and we thank them all for coming. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle. That was super insightful. Thank you so much. I just wanted to quickly say, I know we've gone over time, but a huge, huge thank you to Madonna, Stephen and Trevor for giving up their time in this busy campaign. Your answers tonight were so insightful, and I'm sure everyone has taken away so much, and just a huge thank you. Thank you everyone for coming as well. We are running the She Votes campaign until the election date on May 3rd. And we are asking that from this, you go and have conversations with 10 women or people in your life and spread what you've learned in this. And that trickle-on effect to other women can really help empower women politically, and spread the learning, spread the word. And I'm sure that whoever wins the Brisbane electorate, we're in very safe hands. So thank you so much to all three of you. Nat, is there anything you'd like to say?
I would just like to say a huge thank you to you, Grace, our youngest delegate for our Canberra delegation. You are awesome. Thank you for putting on tonight, and for for asking such insightful questions to the candidates. Thank you, Michelle, for always being so wonderful and a big part of 1 Million Women. Thank you to the candidates. Thank you, everybody, for being here on a Thursday night before a long weekend. We've put some links in the chat. So the first link is to join our She Votes campaign. There are 3 things that we would love you to do. You can do any of them. Share our She Votes, you know, images across your social media channels, talk to the candidates, which you've already done tonight, and have those conversations with your friends, with others in your community about clean, affordable energy now. We've also put our policy ask in the chat. We've put a few other really important links that we think that will be helpful. We will send that around to you all. Thank you for staying on. We really appreciate it. We wouldn't be a movement without you. You are 1 Million Women, and thank you. Have a very safe and happy Easter, and sending you lots of love. I think that's it. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Easter.
Safe travels. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.